Well, hello everybody. As usual, you know, it takes a little time to get everybody rounded up here, and so we'll kind of ease on into this program. It's called "Who is an Ozarker?" Now, right away, we've got a controversy started because some people might say Ozarkian and others might say Ozarker. So this is going to be a session that I think is going to be interesting. I'm really looking forward to it because people have so many opinions about who is an Ozarker and some strong opinions as well. So it'll be fun to kind of talk that through and figure out where we all stand or sit or whatever we're doing at the time on that issue. My name is Bergey, and I grew up in New Haven, Missouri, which is on the northern edge of the Ozarks, right on the Missouri River, and have lived out here for about 5 years or so, but still go home, have lots of family back in Missouri, and there already is another controversy. Do you say Missouri or do you say Missouri? You know, this is a problem because about half the people in the state say Missouri and another half says Missouri. I'm a Missouri person. I don't know, maybe because I went to the University of Missouri, but I don't know. Dorothy, where are you on that issue? You're from Missouri? Okay, Curtis?
Missouri.
Those people in the west, southwest, they don't know how to pronounce it. But anyway, we'll get over it. We'll get over it with time. That. Okay, Missouri. Well, in Missouri. Oh, okay. That's another way. Well, I'm joined for the moment on stage by Dorothy Berry, who is the digital curator of the Smithsonian Museum of African American History, and she comes from Ash Grove. We'll ask her a little bit about that. And over to my left is Curtis Copeland, who lives in Branson and who drew the map, the Ozark map that you'll see on that sign just by the entry, that has already created all kinds of controversy, which is great fun. We're all enjoying that a lot, and I want him to talk about that a little bit as well. But we'll try to meet people. There should be 2 more folks arriving at some point, and we might shuffle up on and off here. But Dorothy, maybe first you could tell us a little bit about your family history and how you came to be in Missouri.
Sure. So I grew up in the house that my great grandparents built in 1872, after they stopped being enslaved up a couple miles away at the currently Nathan Boone National Park or State Park, which at that point was the Nathan Boone Farm. That's Daniel Boone's son. He owned half my family and also produced half my family. So Caroline Boone Berry and William Berry, my great-great-great-grandparents, built this farm that my family has owned and lived on since then. It's owned by my great-uncle Lawrence until I was 10. He passed away, and so my father inherited it and we moved down. My family has also been one of the few black families in the Ozarks that has maintained their family archive, their family collections. A lot of that material currently exists unprocessed so that's like not cataloged or accessible to folks in Missouri State University. But we kept all our stuff because we just don't trust institutions like that, I guess. And so previously, for a good many years, my dad ran the Ozarks Afro-American History Museum, which was in Ash Grove as well.
And that museum is in Ash
It is
Grove?
closed now.
It's closed, I see. And Curtis, what did you do? Since we got there's a who, a where about who's an Ozarker, maybe you could talk a little bit about creating the map of the Ozarks for the festival and what's happened since then.
I plan to.
Okay, sure, yeah. So my background is I am the GIS manager, or Geographic Information Systems manager, for the city of Branson. So for the last 25 years I've been employed with Branson to map all kinds of things, everything from utilities to trails and everything in between. But the GIS is basically, it's digitized or computerized mapping that's associated with databases that talk about those features that you see on the map. And it's used for analyzing anything and everything geographically related. So it's been fun over the years to use that to analyze and research geographically related things about the Ozarks. And so it's been several months ago, but I was approached to see if I would help to put together the map for the Smithsonian Folklife Festival this year. And of course that was a real honor for sure. And so there was actually a map committee, and this afternoon we'll be talking with some other members of the map committee that we're trying to define this Ozarks boundary. And it's really difficult because what the Smithsonian was looking for was not only the physical things that define the Ozarks, like hills and mountain ranges and so forth, and definitely waterways, but also the cultural boundary of the Ozarks, which is really difficult. There's folks that live in the Ozarks region that don't even realize they're in the Ozarks, and then there's folks that live outside of the Ozarks, technically, but they have ways of life and interest and art forms and various things that they feel like Ozarkers. So it's been a challenge. We came up with a map after a lot of research and so forth for the first time probably ever. It includes southern Illinois, and also in the early days, like in the 1800s, some of the earliest maps included the Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas, but it's south of the Arkansas River, so it's actually debatable there too. But the map is, as we say, has kind of gone viral. It's gone out there on the internet, on social media and so forth, and there's a lot of discussion and debate that's going on back home, and it's really interesting to see.
Wow. And you said lots of likes and lots of conversation about the map, the way it's drawn.
Yes.
And is the biggest controversy about southern Illinois, whether it should be included, or?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Well, we'll get back to that question, but we've been joined on stage now by Dewayne Williams, right, from Poplar Bluff,
Missouri.
Poplar Bluff, Missouri. Or he said Missouri too. Good Lord, I'm outnumbered, I think, up here, which is kind of scary. But Dewayne Williams, you have a gospel group out here. I see some family members, the way it looks, who are going to be performing with you this afternoon, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about your family history in Poplar Bluff.
Certainly. I believe we have a really rich musical history within the city of Poplar Bluff, and I would say even specifically within the minority community within Poplar Bluff. We're a small community, and a lot of other gospel-oriented groups. You might have some that may be more concentrated, like in Mississippi or maybe in Chicago, but in the Ozarks, I would say specifically in Southeast Missouri, we kind of have our own specific voice and flavor, and we have a different type of mix as to what influences are part of music and in the music. I'm blessed and honored and lucky to be part of one of the families that is kind of central to the musical scene within the context of Poplar Bluff. My grandfather, Bishop Johnny Williams, he was both a prominent police officer and vocalist and pastor. And the churches kind of center what music is, as far as gospel is. And he's been instrumental in the community and passed that along to my father, who raised myself and my sister along this musical journey as well. So I think something that's kind of central to the voice of the music of where we're from is this generational connection, where you're always building on what was already before you and adding in a little bit more influence and a little bit more flavors from your own experiences.
And do you know when your family came to Poplar Bluff? How far back?
Wow, that's an excellent question. My father would know better than myself, but at least the past 4 generations, on my father's side at least, have been centered around the Harville, Missouri area, Poplar Bluff, and a rural area that they refer to as Bacon's Pasture.
Well, we've already seen a little bit about the cultural diversity of the region, and I think it would be appropriate for us to also mention that here we're probably most likely on Piscataway land, and the Ozarks, long before what were called then settlers, moved into that area. There were Osage and Missouri and Iowa and Illinois, Native American communities and settlements, and after the Trail of Tears in the early 1800s, of course, Cherokee and Kickapoo and many other folks settled there as well. So we can't talk about who is an Ozarker without acknowledging that there were people here long ago who had communities in the Ozarks, and we need to recognize that as well. Another community that settled in the northeastern part of the Ozarks is a French community that came in the 1700s, settled around old mines, Missouri, and they were looking for silver to mine, and they ended up finding lead instead, which wasn't quite the same, and then barite, but they have remained in smaller, tight-knit communities there. Some still speak French, and that's a whole nother area of cultural diversity that we don't talk about too much. A lot of the names, the place names in the state and in the region come from the French settlements, but it's another smaller, more compact in a way, cultural settlement in the Ozark region. Well, Dorothy, maybe you could talk a little bit more about your experience. Did you grow up then in Ash Grove? Your experience growing up, and did you at the time identify as an Ozarker, or how did you think of yourself at the time?
Well, part of historical memory in southwest Missouri, part of the Ozarks, I can't speak for other places, is that they did not have slaves, and that there were never really any black people in the Ozarks, because it was just hard scrabble farmers, a couple of people just working their land. You can still see on things like public library sponsored websites and things that say, the few people that did have slaves in southwest Missouri only had 1 or 2 and treated them like members of the family. So, when I grew up there, I was pretty angry all the time, but that's common for kids, I think. But I was very vocal about my family's history, because I went to school with a bunch of people whose families had moved at some point in the last century to Ash Grove, who were then telling me that black people weren't from there. And I grew up on a century farm. There is a cemetery in the back of our farm. It's a Missouri State Historic Site that has the graves for Caroline Boone Berry. It has graves from folks, indigenous people whose families still come back from Oklahoma, and maybe on the they received histories on the Trail of Tears. I don't think that matches the mapping, but what are you going to say about it? But yeah, I think for me growing up, it was just a lot of, you stick out as a reminder to folks of things they would like to be. Like at the Nathan Boone Rendezvous, every year they have a big reunion. People love to be related to Daniel Boone. And, people come from across the country for that. And years ago, I remember they tried to, ban my dad from attending. And they were like, no, Nathan Boone didn't have these people. But everyone from Ash Grove that was older was like, well, everybody knows that. Everybody knows Berry families with the Boone family. this is known. But, so yeah, I mean, I've always identified as an Ozarkian. I think that's the one I thought it was called, but I'm okay with either one. Especially because I work in African American history, and a lot of folks are from the South, and it's really, I have to clarify a lot that I am from the Ozarks. I'm from a rural place, but I am definitely not culturally Southern in the way that like a lot of my colleagues are. So coming up, they say the sort of Ozarks, it's like this, it's like that. It's been a big part of my identity since childhood, I guess.
And I maybe I missed. I'm trying to figure out the connection with Nathan Boone now. Daniel Boone and Nathan Boone was his son,
Yes.
correct? Yes. And
And my
so
great,
he,
great, great, great grandfather.
your great
I
grandfather,
think it's four, yeah.
four of them. And he settled originally around Femo Sage, which is just north of the Missouri River, not too far from where I grew up. There's a Daniel Boone home there. Surprising to some people, it's not a log cabin. It's a stone building structure because the Boones came in from Pennsylvania before they made their trek out further south and west. So how is Nathan Boone part of the picture?
So Nathan
now?
Boone settled eventually in, I guess, a little bit outside of Ash Grove. It's a couple miles, but there's like a society, he had a house, he had a smaller house where some members of my family lived. But yeah, he lived there.
Uh-huh. And was the farming there, it was a family farm, I take it, or was it a larger, what type of
So-
crops? Wasn't what you call a plantation, right? Or
No, he had just like a farm.
just
He
a
had
farm?
Not
right.
enough folks for a
Just
plantation.
single-family
Yeah.
farm, pretty much. And how many other African American people would have been in Ash Grove at the time, or you're growing up?
Oh, when I was growing up, nobody.
Nobody. Wow.
In the 1900s, there's a mass exodus of black people from the Ozarks. I think after a series of lynchings in Springfield, Joplin, and Pierce City, and estimates up to 40,000 black people left the region. You can read about it in newspaper. If you read the Chicago Defender, a black newspaper of that time, you can read first-person accounts of folks talking about having their homes burnt down and all that sort of stuff. So first there's a mass exodus, and even from that time moving forward, increasingly small. So when my dad grew up in Ash Grove, there were more families. He had cousins, people that lived in town, and there were the Yoakums, another black family in the region whose famous son, Joseph Yoakum, you can see at the American Folk Art Museum. He's a big, at least to call an outsider artist from Ash Grove. But then folks moved to Kansas City or St. Louis, places they might feel safer. And also, frankly, a lot of people moved to Kansas City or St. Louis for opportunity. But nowadays, even in 2020, when they had a bunch of protests everywhere, at Mizzou, when they had black students protesting, people were shouting at them, "Go back to St. Louis, go back to Kansas City," because that is the assumption that you cannot be, and that's even further north. That's the assumption that you can't be from these rural places.
Well, Curtis, we didn't really hear about how your family and how you came to be in the Ozarks. Is there a story there?
Well, so my fifth great grandfather came to what is now Potosi with Moses Austin's son to start. I'm not good with French, but Mine au Breton. And so at that time, the area was in Spanish control, and in order to get the Spanish land grants, Austin had to bring 25 families from Virginia to establish a mining town there. And so that's kind of the farthest back. But my family, after the Civil War, moved down into southern Benton County at the headwaters of the Current River, and then the latest generations have been in southwest Missouri. But Dorothy brought up a really good point about the southern culture, and a lot of times that Ozarks is confused, in my opinion, as a southern culture. The Ozarks is interesting because it's kind of it's kind of the conglomeration of a number of cultures. Yes, there is the southern culture, but you also have Appalachia. You also have kind of the Midwestern agricultural type of culture, and then there's kind of that frontier or Western culture, and it's all kind of collides there in the Ozarks. You know, the Ozarks was overlooked during Western settlement because it was rugged and difficult place to eke out a living, rocky, steep soils and so forth. But I think there's also, because of marketing and movies and literature and cartoons and different things, that a lot of folks don't realize just how diverse the Ozarks is. You know, a lot of it, you know, it's not a place populated with Little Abner and Daisy Mae Yoakum. It's much more diverse than that.
Right. Yeah. Well, Dewayne, what was your experience growing up there in Poplar Bluff? How did you identify culturally at the time?
Concerning the Ozarks in Poplar Bluff, there's this large sign if you're coming into town from the north, like you're coming from St. Louis, coming into Bluff, and it's a large sign that says Gateway to the Ozarks. And honestly, growing up, it's kind of like there's this joke where there's this elder fish, and he sees some younger fish, and he asks them, you know, how's the water today, boys? And then they say, what's water? Because they're in it, but they've always existed in it, so they don't necessarily know it from the outside. And I guess growing up concerning the Ozarks, that's what it was more like for me. I didn't necessarily recognize it as being a distinct culture per se, because it's a culture that I was always in and always part of, and didn't really have a reference point or experiences outside of. So it didn't take, you know, I didn't understand until adulthood, you know, kind of what it meant as far as what, as he was saying, geographically speaking, and as he was also saying, you know, the culture of the Ozarks, you know, we're not a monolith. You know, everybody's not all the same. Doesn't do all the same types of things or eat all the same type of food or listens to all the same type of music, but there's kind of commonalities that run through things. And as I said, you know, I wasn't outside of it, so I didn't necessarily recognize, you know, what that really meant until I came of age.
Did you leave Poplar Bluff at a time and then discover there were people who lived differently than yourself, or did you, I mean, to me that was a shock when I left a small town and went to the big University of Missouri, and encountered all these folks who were totally different, had a totally different background. I thought, holy cow, you mean there are people different? You know, but did you have that experience yourself at all?
I went to Arkansas State, so it was, you know, a little bit south of the Arkansas-Missouri or Missouri border going into Arkansas. I wouldn't say that necessarily a culture shock in that respect, or an enlightening in that respect, just coming into more knowledge of understanding culture and geography, I guess, period. You know, we kind of have a different frame of mind concerning, you know, who I am and where I'm from and what that means, or why that means something to begin with.
Well, I wanted to mention that, and there, something I was involved in a long time ago was an album called "I'm Old But I'm Awfully Tough." It says the subtitle is "Traditional Music of the Ozark Region," and we kind of escaped the issue of the Ozarks. We said the Ozark region, so we got a little bit up above the Missouri River in some of the recordings. But the gentleman sitting here, Nelson Hermia, sitting in the front row, his grandfather is on that album, and Emmanuel Wood, who was recorded for the album, lived in Ozark, Missouri, and used to have a gathering on the town square called Ozark Opry, and we'd go down there and record folks, and his grandfather, of course, is part of the album as well. But there also was a person there who would perform with them, named By Kelly, an African American who lived in Ozark and who had deep roots as well. And at the time, it was a little bit unusual to see an African American bass player playing with an old time, kind of what we call an old time string band. He also played with bluegrass bands. But Nelson, I wonder if you could tell folks just a little bit about By Kelly, because I think he is an interesting person. I think that mic is live, and I think we got some pictures of By Kelly and relatives there. I think it's on.
Okay, can you hear me? I had the great privilege of growing up in Ozark, Missouri. I was born very close to the square, and it's interesting to hear Dwayne's comments as far as how did I identify myself. I don't think that I really thought about being part of the Ozarks until I left the area and began responding to people's reactions to my background. But as far as Byron Kelly, I enjoyed watching his bass. He taught my mother how to play the bass, which she played until I have a picture of her at 82 years old playing at a nursing home, rather a senior center. And Mr. Kelly, I had the great privilege of becoming a recipient of all the Kelly photos, genealogy, and a lot of materials from the family when Mr. Kelly's son died a few years ago. And I've been researching it, trying to learn more about the family. Byron Kelly was born in 1892, and he went to a small school. It was an all-black school. There were about 9 or 10 families in 1900 there in the town of Ozark. And I attended Missouri State University for 2 summers, and a really wonderful professor there in my government class explained how all these individuals from Kentucky Hills, Tennessee Hills, had fought to the north during the Civil War, and they weren't really comfortable or welcomed after the Civil War, and they moved west. And so many of them settled in the Southwest, and that they didn't have enslaved people. And so the question churned in my mind, well, where did these 9 or 10 families come from who lived in Ozark, Missouri? And I began studying the issue, and I read a very small history book from the local library. And it turns out there were 5 plantations before the Civil War that grew cotton in the Ozark area. And Ozark is just a little bit, there's flatter land there, like Springfield, compared to some of the other rougher Ozarks. And Byron Kelly's family was one of these families. There was a planter that lived south of Ozark. His last name is Lawing, L-A-W-I-N-G. And so the older photo here is Byron Kelly's grandparents. His mother is on the right, and his grandmother, Rachel Kelly, and on the left is his grandfather. His grandmother was born on the plantation to the south of Ozark, the best I can determine from local records. Byron himself, in the 1910 census, he's working for the railroad. There's a picture of him with a railroad crew. And by 1920, he was a miller, and worked for the Ozark Mill, which is now been converted into a very nice restaurant. And so his musical abilities exceeded most people who attended this Saturday night gig. He read music. He was his own sister taught in the school. That you see a picture of him and his sister there. And he played for years for Riverside Inn. He played the cello, played the bass, and they had all sorts of music there during the 20s. 30s, and then as a side, he became acquainted with Emmanuel Wood. So the family stayed friends throughout Emmanuel's lifetime. My wife and I went to California to interview his son. I wanted to find out from his son's perspective a little bit more about Byron's perception of the music there at Ozark. And it turned out that his son had no heirs, so the administrator saw a lot of correspondence between me and Mike Kelly's son, and asked me if I was interested in anything. And I'm hopeful that at some point Ozark Studies will become interested in this material, and that they can tie some loose ends here as far as many questions as this material raised. I'll make one last comment. What was interesting to me is even though Rachel Kelly was born there south of Ozark, in the 1870 census, she was living in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. And that's where By Kelly's mother is living also. So the big question mark is how she and her husband got to Iowa. Did they flee to a free state? Just what happened exactly? And then Alcee, his mother, eventually moved back to Ozark. The only speculation might be because she had family there, and Byron then grew up there in a small town. It was about 1,500 people. But his grandfather had a real estate valued at $300 there in Iowa in 1870. So all those present very interesting
Wow.
to explore.
Thank you, Nelson. That's great to hear, and we'll keep the pictures up there for a while so you can take a little bit of a closer a look at those as well. Well, how many people here are Ozarkers? How many would say they're Ozarkers? One, two, yeah, Chris there. Yeah, we got a few out there. And we'd welcome any questions or comments you might have at this point for our esteemed panelists, or if you want to make a comment, you want to argue about how you pronounce Missouri, we can do that too. But does anybody have a question or a comment? Okay, we got two. There is a mic here if you'd like to come up and so people can hear you.
So my question is about the cultural borders of the Ozarks. You said in making the map you moved into southern Illinois, which was controversial. Presumably that was on a cultural basis. And so what were the sort of cultural factors that you looked at in defining this? Because we've heard a lot about how diverse the culture is, but what are the threads that run through to make that border?
Well, I'll start with kind of the end of your question first. What is that thread that kind of binds, what makes somebody feel like they are an Ozarker? And I really feel like it is people in the Ozarks have a sense of place, and that the land is very important to them. The terrain, historically the terrain has, although similar to Appalachia, the ways of agriculture, the ways of music, the way of life is very similar to that as well. But there's something about the land, even recreation, the waterways, the rivers, fishing, floating, all of those different things. Just like anywhere else, it's really driven by the environment, and then so we do have some folks that were also interested in participating in this festival that were from Southern Illinois and had always identified as Ozarkers, if you will. Terrain is similar, rolling hills and so forth, but also like styles of music. There's a group from an area south of Carbondale that their style of music, even some of their ways, their manners of speech is very similar to what you might find in Northwest Arkansas or Southwest Missouri. And so that's always the challenge, you know. Geologic and geographic features are real easy, but easy to kind of delineate. But what makes an Ozarker an Ozarker? What are those unique things that we all feel are common, you know?
Yeah, and I'd say, you know, it's good that we point out that the Ozarks is more diverse than one might think, but it's not diverse. Like, it's more diverse than one might think. It's not 100% quite. But it's not like you come down to most parts of the Ozarks and are stunned by the diversity. Like, you know, if there are black folks, they probably all live in the same part of town.
And Dorothy, can I add on to that as
Yes.
well? Okay, yeah, I would tell you, I've told, you know, it was such an honor just to be here and be part of this, but it's been a real life-changing experience because, as Dorothy had mentioned, it's really actually pretty homogenous, and rather than, you know, it's so great to be able to celebrate these diverse elements, and it's been a huge learning experience just for myself, and getting to meet the diversity of our Ozarks up close and personal. It's been fantastic, and you know, just like arguing geographic boundaries, there's an argument is, well, is the Ozarks isolated and remote, and does it continue to be? I think there's arguments that it still is. I think there's people that are purposely isolate themselves. I mean, the early 20th century through the Depression and so forth, and even today is a hideout for bandits, you know. If people want to hide in the Ozarks, they can. So there's the opportunity to be isolated either by choice or just by circumstance. But I think the people that argue that is that we don't realize that there is diversity, and I'm really thankful that through technology and different things that we're able to see that we are a diverse community in the Ozarks, for sure. So.
Dewayne, do you have any thoughts about that, the common threads of the Ozarks?
I guess to the last point that he was making concerning whether people can, you know, isolate themselves. I think it's interesting because when I, you know, read the question that we'd be asking, you know, what is an Ozarker? I think that's a moving target. It's going to be a moving target because as time progresses, more different people from more different places will integrate who they are and what they are into what we are. As she was mentioning, you know, that might not be to the extent of maybe some other place, or maybe as fast as some other place as far as cultural integration. But I think that, you know, that is something to think about and something to dwell on and consider at least.
Yeah, I think that there is a sense of identity. I know I was actually born in Iowa, not about 30 miles from Mount Pleasant, not far away from Mount Pleasant that you mentioned, Nelson. But when we moved to New Haven, which was when I was 10 years old, we were always the people who came from somewhere else. I mean, we weren't New Haven people necessarily, you know. I mean, it just takes generations sometimes to have that local identity. I think this gentleman had a question or comment. If you wouldn't mind using the mic, that'd be great.
I have a question and a comment. And the question I'd like to address to Nelson, if I could. You referred to the somebody in your story in Springfield who worked for the railroad. If you look at the WPA Guide to Missouri and read the chapter on Springfield, it says 20% of the adult males in Springfield work for the Frisco Railroad. And I just would like for you to comment on that, but I would also like to share a story. I live here now, but I'm from Dade County, Missouri, which is the county west of Springfield. And there's one name on that wall down at the other end of the mall from Dade County, Missouri. It's a black man named Daniel Sharp. And Daniel graduated from high school like either 59 or 60. He graduated with my Uncle Charles Kramer, who was an officer in the Army in Vietnam. As I said, Daniel's name is on that wall. He lost his life in Vietnam. And every Veterans Day and every Memorial Day, my uncle makes sure that there's flowers on Daniel's grave in the black part of the cemetery in Greenfield. But there's a lady over here at the quilter's table. Unfortunately, she's sick and she's not there today. Joetta Gleason. And her husband went to high school with Daniel. And she told me a story about her husband and boys that he ran around with, who included Daniel when they were in high school. Greenfield, the county seat, has always had a black population. The neighboring town, 8 miles away, that's out of the Ozarks, it's on the prairie, is Lockwood. And people in Greenfield used to call, well, they still do call Lockwood Kraut City because of all the Germans. And because there was a black population in Greenfield, the people in Lockwood called Greenfield a name that I'm not going to repeat. But in the late 50s, Daniel and a group of boys decided to go to try to see a picture, or see a movie in Lockwood. And Joetta's husband and these other fellas, they were 16, 17, they told Daniel, you go get your ticket first. And if they won't sell you a ticket, we're not buying one, we're heading back to Greenfield, which is kind of a tribute to that out-of-the-way place called Greenfield, Missouri, that's dearer to me than any place on earth. But it's also a story about a young man who lost his life when he wasn't even 25. He was unmarried and he has no children, he has no family left, and his name is Daniel Sharp. And in the last few years, we've all learned that it's important to say the names of people. And I am honored to say the name Daniel Sharp at this festival. So that's my story, but if you got something to say about the Frisco, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, my folks are from Greenfield as well.
Oh,
They were yeah, my dad's family, half of them are from Greenfield as well. They were somebody's ministers at the AME church. And there's a really, Greenfield used to publish in the newspaper at Christmas time letters to Santa from local children. And there is a letter from my grandmother I guess that would have been in the 40s. It says, Dear Santa, I am Wanda Carlock. I am a little color girl. I would like a chenille bed coat for Christmas.
wow.
Thank you very much.
Wow.
And I just love that she's asking for a fancy bed coat and also letting Santa know that she's a color girl.
That's great. Nelson, you want to respond about the railroad?
Sure, I don't know a lot about the railroad in general, but I'll tell you my own family's connection. The railroad seemed to be a good deal, good retirement. My oldest cousin worked for years for Frisco. And my father, when he first immigrated to Ozark from Cuba, worked for Frisco Railroad in Springfield. And the railroad was the biggest thing in town in Camagüey, Cuba. And all of my family, my uncles, my abuelo, my grandfather, they all worked for the railroad there. So it was just natural that you'd look for something solid like the Frisco Railroad to support your family. And I think eventually he may have left the railroad there and went to greener pastures up in Cleveland. So we all went up that direction. But Frisco was good to my family. So.
All right. Well, I think we've just about run out of time here, but I want to thank so much Dorothy and Curtis and Dewayne and Nelson out there. And as I say, if you want to come up and talk with folks, we've got about a 15-minute period before the next session starts, I believe, and take a look at those pictures, those historic pictures as well. And we'll remind you the 3 R's of the festival after a session. That is to rehydrate, recycle, take your stuff if you got it to recycle, and please return. Please come back for the next session. We'll see you in about 10 or 15 minutes. Let's have a round of applause for our panelists today.